When a slave man helped the master's wife undress after she fell in the lake, an unexpected chain of events began to unfold. In a world where power and privilege dictate every moment, this single act of compassion threatens to unravel everything. What starts as a desperate struggle for survival transforms into a gripping tale of connection and courage, challenging the very fabric of society. Stay with us as we uncover how a moment in the water ignited a spark that could change everything. On a sweltering afternoon, the plantation lay draped in oppressive heat, a haven for secrets and unspoken desires. The sun blazed high in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields where Samuel, a slave forged by toil, worked diligently. His hands were calloused from years of labor, and his muscles ached under the relentless sun. Every stroke of the hoe was a reminder of his bondage, yet today, amidst the rhythmic sound of his work, a flicker of something different stirred within him, a sense of anticipation. As he lifted his gaze, he spotted Margaret, the master's wife, standing at the water's edge. Dressed in a flowing white gown that shimmered against the emerald backdrop of the trees, she appeared ethereal, yet her expression was clouded with a deep-seated sadness. Her beauty was striking, framed by cascading chestnut hair and bright blue eyes that glinted with unfulfilled dreams. Samuel had seen her from a distance before, always surrounded by the trappings of her status, but today there was something more, a longing for freedom that echoed in the depths of his own heart. He watched as she walked closer to the lake, her bare feet barely making a sound against the grass. The water seemed to beckon her, a seductive promise of escape from the constraints of her life. But just as he began to feel a flicker of hope for her, a hope that perhaps they could both break free from their chains, disaster struck. With a sudden misstep, she slipped on the muddy bank, her arms flailing as she fell into the lake with a terrified scream, the sound piercing through the stillness of the afternoon. In that moment, Samuel's world narrowed to a single point of focus. The weight of the moment pressed against his chest, and the instinct to act surged through him like a tidal wave. He had a choice: to turn away, to protect himself from the consequences of his actions, or to dive headfirst into the chaos that threatened to engulf Margaret. Without a second thought, he leaped into the water, the coolness shocking his senses as he swam toward her. The lake, once a serene refuge, transformed into a treacherous foe. Margaret thrashed about, her panic rising like the water around her. Samuel could see the fear in her eyes, and it fueled his determination. He pushed himself harder, each stroke powered by a mix of desperation and resolve. The distance between them seemed infinite, but he would not let her drown. As he closed the gap, he could see her struggling to keep her head above water, her gown clinging to her form, weighing her down like 1,000 burdens. Finally, he reached her, grasping her arm with a firm grip. As he pulled her toward the surface, he felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. Together, they broke free from the depths, gasping for air. Samuel's heart raced not just from exertion, but from the sheer intensity of the moment, a moment that defied the boundaries of their worlds. They emerged from the lake, water cascading off them like the remnants of their old lives, leaving only the raw truth of their humanity exposed. Margaret collapsed onto the bank, coughing and sputtering as she gasped for breath. Samuel knelt beside her, his own heart pounding as he caught his breath, the reality of what had just happened settling over them like a thick fog. Their eyes met, and in that fleeting moment, something shifted between them, a connection forged in the fires of adversity, in an act of bravery that transcended their roles. But what he didn't know was that this act of heroism would set off a chain of events neither could foresee, reshaping their destinies in ways that would challenge the very foundations of their lives. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the plantation, the air around them was thick with unspoken words and unacknowledged feelings. Samuel and Margaret sat on the bank of the lake, their bodies still dripping with water, yet the chill of the evening breeze sent shivers down their spines. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them and the weight of what had just transpired, a moment suspended in time that felt both surreal and monumental. Margaret turned to Samuel, her blue eyes wide with a mix of gratitude and confusion. "Why did you save me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, laden with both awe and disbelief. It was a question that lingered in the air, heavy with implications and the gravity of their circumstances. Samuel met her gaze, a million thoughts racing through his mind. He could have easily walked away, could have chosen self-preservation over defiance, but something deeper had compelled him to act, an instinct that transcended the boundaries of their societal roles. "Because you needed help," he replied simply, the truth of his words resonating between them like a fragile bridge spanning the chasm of their worlds. In that moment, the barriers of their lives seemed to dissolve, the slave and the mistress connected by a thread of shared humanity that neither had acknowledged before. But as the reality of their situation began to settle back in, the weight of their roles pressed heavily upon Samuel's shoulders, reminding him of the peril he now faced. Margaret bit her lip, her expression shifting as she processed his words. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You could be punished for helping me." The fear was palpable in her tone, and Samuel could see the conflict in her eyes, a battle between her ingrained beliefs about their society and the undeniable bond that had just formed. He knew the risks all too well. The consequences of crossing the boundaries set by their world were severe and unforgiving. "I'm willing to take that risk," Samuel replied, his voice steadier than he felt, bolstered by the rush of adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "But you must promise me something in return." His heart raced as he spoke, knowing the weight of his request. "You must not forget what happened here today. You must remember that we are not just our titles or our roles. We are people." His plea hung in the air, a fragile hope clinging to the possibility of change. Margaret nodded slowly, her expression softening, determination sparking in her eyes. "I promise," she said, her voice firm now, a newfound resolve settling in her chest. "But what will we do now? What if someone sees us?" The urgency in her voice underscored the precariousness of their situation, as the distant sound of voices began to break through the tranquility of the evening. Just then, a distant voice called out, shattering the fragile moment. "Margaret! Where are you?" Panic surged through them both. Margaret's face drained of color as she scrambled to her feet, instinctively looking for a place to hide. Samuel's heart raced, knowing that even the slightest hint of their encounter could lead to dire consequences for them both. "You need to go," he urged her, his voice low but urgent. "Now." He could see the conflict in her eyes. Part of her wanted to run, to escape back to the safety of her life, while another part wanted to stay, to acknowledge the bond they had just forged. The sound of footsteps drew closer, and the shadows of the approaching figures loomed larger in the fading light. "But I can't just leave you here," she protested, a hint of desperation in her voice, her heart torn between her loyalty to her social standing and her newfound understanding of their shared humanity. Samuel stepped closer, the tension thick in the air, each breath a reminder of the stakes they faced. "You must. If they find out, I won't survive the punishment." His words hung heavily between them, a stark reminder of the reality they faced. With a heavy heart, Margaret nodded, realization dawning upon her. "I'll find a way to help you, I promise." The strength in her voice was both a comfort and a burden, a testament to the bond they had formed against all odds, and with that she turned and dashed into the trees, her figure disappearing into the shadows as Samuel watched, a mixture of hope and dread swirling within him. He knew that their lives would never be the same again. As the last rays of sunlight faded, leaving only the cool embrace of twilight, Samuel stood alone by the lake, the weight of their encounter pressing heavily upon him. The bond they had formed was fragile but powerful, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it was just the beginning. In the days to come, their choices would ripple through the fabric of their lives, intertwining their fates in ways neither could yet comprehend. He remained by the water's edge, the sounds of the plantation fading into the background. The world felt different now, charged with an electricity that hadn't existed before. Samuel recalled the look in Margaret's eyes as she had pleaded with him to stay, the unspoken understanding that had passed between them. He realized that for the first time he had acted not just as a slave, but as a man, a human being deserving of agency and connection. Little did they know that the seeds of change had been planted, and the storm of consequences was just beginning to brew. With every passing moment, the risks they faced loomed larger, and the decisions they would make in the coming days would test the limits of their courage, their loyalty, and their emerging bond in a world designed to keep them apart. The days that followed were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Samuel returned to the fields, the weight of his encounter with Margaret pressing heavily on his mind. Each swing of his hoe felt like a reminder of the barriers that divided them, his world of toil and oppression against her life of privilege and ease. Yet, beneath the surface, a new current of hope began to flow, intertwining their fates in ways neither could fully understand. Samuel's thoughts wandered back to the lake, to the moment when he had pulled Margaret from the water, an act of bravery that had awakened something deep within him, something he had long thought extinguished. Margaret, too, felt the shift within her. Every time she passed by the fields, she stole glances at Samuel, his strong frame bent over the earth, seemingly lost in thought. She was haunted by the memory of his courage, the way he had risked everything to save her. Her heart swelled with admiration, but it was also laced with fear. She had witnessed the consequences of defiance in her world, and the thought of Samuel facing punishment because of her was unbearable. Each day felt like a countdown, a ticking clock reminding her of the danger that loomed over them both. One evening, as twilight settled over the plantation, Margaret made her way to the back of the house, her heart racing with anticipation and anxiety. She had devised a plan, a way to see Samuel and ensure his safety without drawing attention. The sun dipped low in the sky, painting the horizon in hues of orange and purple. As she approached the edge of the woods, she felt the cool breeze brush against her skin, a silent encouragement to move forward. The familiar path felt both exciting and perilous, each step echoing the resolve she had found since their fateful encounter. "Samuel," she called softly, her voice barely above a whisper, carrying through the stillness of the evening. The shadows deepened around her, and her heart pounded in her chest as she waited, the anticipation almost overwhelming. Moments later, she heard the rustling of leaves, and then he emerged from the darkness, his expression a mix of relief and concern. The sight of him sent a jolt of warmth through her, but she was acutely aware of the danger that surrounded them. "Margaret," he breathed, stepping into the dim light that filtered through the trees. "What are you doing here?" His voice was a low murmur, filled with urgency and a hint of disbelief. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he scanned the area for any signs of danger. In that moment, she realized the gravity of their situation. The world they inhabited was fraught with peril, and their connection placed them both at risk. "I had to see you," she replied, her eyes shining with determination. "I couldn't just leave things as they were. I need to know you're safe." The sincerity in her voice resonated deeply with Samuel, igniting a flicker of hope in his heart. He had long felt isolated in his struggle, but Margaret's presence reminded him that he was not alone. Samuel stepped closer, the weight of her words sinking in. "You shouldn't have come. If someone sees you—" He felt a rush of protective instinct surge through him, the desire to shield her from harm battling against the yearning for connection that had blossomed between them. "I don't care," she interrupted, her voice firm and unwavering. "I won't let fear dictate my actions. We have to find a way to help each other." Her eyes bore into his, and in that moment he saw not just the master's wife, but a woman willing to challenge the very foundations of their society. The resolve in her gaze ignited something deep within him, a spark of hope that they could forge a new path together, despite the risks. "What do you mean?" Samuel asked, his brow furrowing as he considered the implications of her words. He had spent so long fighting against the despair that threatened to consume him, and now Margaret was offering a glimmer of possibility. "You know the risk. If anyone finds out—" He trailed off, the weight of the consequences pressing heavily on his mind. Margaret's expression softened, and she reached out, placing her hand on his arm, a gesture of solidarity and connection that sent a shiver down his spine. "I may not know your pain, but I understand what it means to feel trapped, to long for freedom. I want to use my position to make a difference. We can find a way to meet in secret, to plan." The weight of her offer hung in the air, a fragile promise that could shatter at any moment, but it was also a lifeline, an opportunity to create change. Samuel searched her eyes, looking for any sign of hesitation, but all he found was determination. "If we're going to do this, we need to be careful. One misstep could lead to disaster." He felt a rush of hope, tempered by the harsh reality of their lives. "I know," Margaret replied, her voice steady. "But we can't let fear control us. I believe we can change things, even if it's just a little at a time." The passion in her words stirred something deep within Samuel, igniting a fire of hope that he thought had long since extinguished. It was a dangerous notion, but the promise of change was intoxicating. "All right," he said finally, a sense of resolve settling over him as he nodded. "But we have to be discreet. We can meet here, by the lake, when it's dark. No one can know." Margaret nodded, her heart racing with the thrill of their shared secret. "I promise to keep our meeting secret. I'll bring you whatever supplies I can. Food, clothing, anything to make your life a little easier." The enormity of her offer weighed on her, but the thought of Samuel enduring hardship alone was unbearable. As they stood together in the shadows, a pact was formed in whispered promises and shared glances. They would defy the constraints of their world, working together to navigate the treacherous waters of their society. Samuel felt a sense of purpose wash over him, the realization that he was no longer alone in his struggle. They were partners now, bound together by a common goal. "We'll find a way," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "Together." The moon hung high in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the lake, a witness to their newfound alliance. As they parted ways, their hearts were filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation, aware that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. But in that moment, they were united by a shared dream. A dream of freedom, of breaking the chains that bound them, and of finding their place in a world that sought to keep them apart. Little did they know that their whispered pact would set into motion a series of events that would change the course of their lives forever, forcing them to confront not only the societal norms that bound them, but also the complexities of their own hearts. The days ahead would test their resolve and challenge their beliefs, as they dared to dream of a future where love and freedom could coexist, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The days turned into weeks, and the secret meetings by the lake became a lifeline for both Samuel and Margaret. Each encounter was filled with hushed conversations and stolen moments, where they shared their dreams and fears, weaving a tapestry of hope against the backdrop of their oppressive reality. With every meeting, their bond deepened, transcending the roles society had imposed upon them. Samuel found solace in Margaret's presence, her unwavering spirit a beacon in the darkness that surrounded him. In her eyes, he saw a reflection of his own yearning for freedom, and together they dared to dream of a different life. Margaret brought small supplies each time, pieces of bread, ripe fruit from the kitchen, and even scraps of fabric that she could sneak away unnoticed. Each item was a symbol of her growing commitment to their cause, a tangible reminder of the life she hoped to help Samuel achieve. She often found herself daydreaming about the world beyond the plantation, a world where they could walk freely under the sun, unburdened by the chains of their existence. Samuel, in turn, shared stories of his life, tales filled with both laughter and sorrow. He spoke of his family, of the traditions they had cherished, and the dreams that had been dashed by the harsh realities of bondage. Each story added weight to their shared purpose, solidifying their resolve to change their fates. But as the nights grew longer, so did the tension in the air. Rumors began to swirl around the plantation, whispers of discontent among the enslaved workers. The overseers, sensing the unrest, tightened their grip, increasing punishments and surveillance. Samuel could feel the change in the atmosphere, an electric charge that hinted at impending conflict. He became more vigilant, acutely aware that their secret meetings could easily be discovered. The realization that their actions carried profound consequences weighed heavily on his mind. One night, as they sat by the lake, the moonlight reflecting off the water like shards of silver glass, Margaret's voice trembled with concern. "What if they find out? What if someone sees us?" Her eyes darted around the shadows, betraying her fear. She felt the chill of doubt creeping into her heart, a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the darkness. "We have to be cautious," Samuel replied, his tone serious. "But we also can't stop. If we do, we lose everything we've worked for. We must stay strong." He reached out, taking her hands in his, grounding them both in the moment. "We are on the brink of something powerful, Margaret. I can feel it." His conviction ignited a fire within her, a spark of courage that pushed aside her fears. Margaret nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her heart. "I just wish there was a way to make a real change, to show others that they don't have to accept their fate." The fire in her voice ignited a spark of hope in Samuel. They had spoken of rebellion in abstract terms, but now the reality of their situation pressed heavily upon them. They were not just fighting for themselves, but for everyone who had suffered under the yoke of oppression. "Maybe we can start small," Samuel suggested, his mind racing with possibilities. "If we can gather others, share our stories, we might inspire them to act. We can't do this alone." The thought of leading others into rebellion filled him with both excitement and trepidation. He had witnessed the consequences of such actions, but the idea of collective strength was intoxicating, a balm for the wounds of solitude. "You're right," Margaret agreed, her eyes brightening with determination. "We can't stay silent any longer. We need to be the voices for those who can't speak." Together, they began to formulate a plan, their minds racing with ideas. They discussed how to reach out to trusted individuals among the enslaved, those who shared their vision of freedom and were willing to take the risk. As they plotted, the tension around the plantation continued to escalate. The overseers, on high alert from the growing unrest, began to impose stricter measures, punishing even minor infractions with brutal consequences. Samuel watched as fear permeated the fields, the weight of oppression heavy in the air. He knew that the time for action was drawing near, and every moment counted. The threat of violence hung over them like a dark cloud, and he felt the urgency of their mission more acutely than ever. One evening, as they met under a canopy of stars, Samuel's voice lowered to a whisper. "I've spoken to a few trusted men in the fields. They're willing to join us." His heart raced with the gravity of his words. "We need to be ready. If we're going to do this, we must act swiftly and decisively." His eyes shone with a fierce determination that Margaret found infectious. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. The prospect of gathering a group filled her with a mixture of exhilaration and dread. What if it fails? What if we're caught? The reality of their situation loomed large, but the fire in Samuel's eyes reassured her. She wanted to believe in their cause, to trust in the strength of their collective spirit. "Failure is a part of any fight for freedom," he said firmly, "but standing by and doing nothing is the true defeat. We cannot allow fear to dictate our actions. We owe it to ourselves and to those who came before us." His words resonated deeply within her, igniting her spirit and fortifying her resolve. With renewed determination, they began to solidify their plans, outlining the steps they needed to take to gather support and create a network of resistance. They spoke in hushed tones, their excitement palpable as they envisioned a future where they could live without fear, where freedom was not just a distant dream, but a tangible reality. Each word exchanged was a step toward their shared liberation, a promise to each other that they would fight against the injustices that bound them. But as the days passed, the atmosphere grew increasingly charged. Tensions within the plantation reached a boiling point when a beloved elder among the enslaved was brutally punished for speaking out against the overseers. The incident sent shockwaves through the community, igniting a firestorm of anger and despair. Samuel felt the shift, the collective pain transforming into a fierce desire for change. He knew that the time had come to act, to harness that anger and channel it into a movement for liberation. The night after the elder's punishment, Samuel and Margaret met by the lake, the air thick with anticipation. "This is it," Samuel said, his voice steady. "We must act now. We can't wait any longer for the perfect moment. The time for change is upon us." His heart raced with the gravity of his words, fueled by the urgency of the moment. Margaret nodded, her heart racing with the thrill of their shared secret. "Then let's gather everyone. We need to show them that they are not alone, that we can fight back." The conviction in her voice fueled Samuel's resolve, and together they prepared to rally their fellow enslaved people, ready to face the storm that was brewing on the horizon. As they stood by the lake, the moon illuminating their path, they could feel the weight of their decision. They were stepping into the unknown, risking everything for the chance at freedom. But within that uncertainty lay the promise of change, a chance to rewrite their destinies and challenge the very foundations of their world. The water lapped gently at the shore, a soothing reminder that even in chaos there could be peace, a peace they hoped to reclaim. Little did they know that the gathering storm would test their courage and resolve in ways they could never have anticipated. The path ahead would be fraught with danger, but their hearts burned with the fire of hope, ready to ignite a revolution that would change their lives forever. As they parted that night, the weight of their pact hung in the air, a silent promise that they would not falter, that they would fight for a future where freedom was not just a dream, but a new dawn waiting to be claimed. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. Samuel and Margaret worked tirelessly, gathering a small but determined group of trusted individuals, each carrying their own stories of pain and resilience. They met in secret, away from the prying eyes of the overseers, sharing their dreams of freedom and the need for collective action. The air around them crackled with energy, a palpable sense of purpose that fueled their resolve. Each meeting became a sanctuary, a place where they could express their hopes and fears without the weight of the world pressing down on them. As they gathered by the lake, Samuel felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The group consisted of men and women who had endured the harsh realities of plantation life, each one carrying the scars of oppression. They shared their fears and hopes, transforming their pain into a powerful catalyst for change. Samuel had chosen each member carefully, ensuring that they were not only trustworthy but also passionate about the cause. Among them was Elijah, a strong man with a deep voice who had been a leader in his own right, often guiding others through the trials of daily life. There was also Rachel, a fierce young woman with a spirit that seemed unbreakable, whose laughter often masked the sorrow she carried within. Each person brought unique strengths to the group, skills, knowledge, and the unyielding desire for freedom. "We cannot let fear hold us back any longer," Samuel declared one evening, his voice rising above the gentle lapping of the water. "We are stronger together, and it is time to stand up for what is right. We owe it to ourselves and to those who came before us." His words ignited a fire in the hearts of his companions, a collective determination that bound them together as they prepared to take a stand against their oppressors. He could see the flicker of hope in their eyes, a light that had long been dimmed by despair and hardship. Margaret stood beside him, her heart racing as she watched the faces of those gathered around the flickering light of a small fire. "Each of you has a story, a reason for wanting to fight back," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "We must share these stories with others. We need to show them that they are not alone, that we can unite and challenge the injustices we face." The murmurs of agreement rippled through the group, their spirits lifted by her words. In that moment, they were not just individuals bound by circumstance, but a collective force, ready to change the course of their lives. As the night wore on, they discussed strategies, the logistics of gathering more supporters, and how to spread the word without drawing the attention of the overseers. They spoke in hushed tones, fearful that any careless word could lead to disaster. Samuel emphasized the importance of secrecy, knowing that their lives depended on it. "We must be patient and calculated," he urged. "If we act too soon, we risk everything." His words hung in the air, heavy with the reality of their situation. In the following days, the group began to implement their plan. They spread the word quietly, using trusted connections to reach others who shared their vision of freedom. Samuel and Margaret took turns visiting different sections of the plantation, speaking to those they felt could be allies in their cause. Each encounter was a delicate dance, balancing the need for secrecy with the urgency of their mission. They listened to the fears of their fellow workers, offering words of encouragement and hope, slowly building momentum for what was to come. But as they worked to gather strength, the overseers grew increasingly suspicious. Reports of unrest began to circulate, and the atmosphere on the plantation turned sour. Tensions were high, and the overseers' brutal tactics escalated in response to the slightest hint of dissent. Samuel could feel the fear creeping back into the hearts of his people, but he refused to let it take root. He reminded them that they had each other and that their shared struggle was a powerful force against the darkness they faced. Each day, he would gather the group and remind them of their purpose, their dreams, and the strength they drew from one another. One fateful evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the fields, Samuel and Margaret gathered the group once more by the lake. The air was thick with anticipation, the moment they had been preparing for finally at hand. "Tomorrow night we will hold a gathering beneath the stars," Samuel announced, his voice steady but the weight of the moment evident in his expression. "We will share our stories with everyone who comes. We will show them that the time for change is now." The group erupted in a mix of excitement and anxiety. They knew the risks involved, but the fire of rebellion burned brightly in their hearts. "We'll need to be careful," Rachel cautioned, her brow furrowed with concern. "The overseers will be watching. If they catch wind of what we're planning—" "We won't let that happen," Margaret interjected, her voice filled with determination. "We have to believe in our strength. This is our chance to unite, to show everyone that we are more than just laborers. We are human beings deserving of dignity and freedom." Her words resonated deeply, and the group felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were not just fighting for themselves, they were fighting for the generations that had come before them, and for those who would come after. As they parted that night, Samuel and Margaret lingered by the water's edge, the weight of their decision heavy in the air. "Do you really think they'll come?" Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the uncertainty in her heart evident. "They will," Samuel replied confidently. "They are tired of living in fear. We are all tired. This is just the beginning." He took her hands in his, grounding them both in the moment. "No matter what happens, we are in this together." Their connection felt stronger than ever, a bond forged in the crucible of shared struggle and hope. The next day, the tension on the plantation reached a boiling point. The overseers, increasingly paranoid about the growing unrest, began to impose stricter measures, patrolling the fields more aggressively and punishing even the slightest acts of defiance. Samuel could feel the pressure mounting, and he knew that they were walking a tightrope, balancing on the edge of rebellion. The overseer's eyes seemed to follow him everywhere, and he could sense their hostility lurking just beneath the surface. But as night fell, the moon shone brightly, illuminating the path to the lake. One by one, people began to arrive, drawn by the whispers of change and the promise of hope. Samuel and Margaret stood at the forefront, their hearts racing as they watched their fellow workers gather, each face illuminated by the glow of the moonlight, a constellation of souls united in their quest for freedom. The atmosphere was charged with emotion, a mix of fear and excitement, as they prepared to share their stories and rally their spirits. As the crowd grew, Samuel stepped forward, his voice carrying over the water. "Thank you for coming," he began, his heart pounding in his chest. "We are here tonight not just as individuals, but as a community. We have suffered long enough, and it is time to stand together against the injustices we face every day." He paused, letting his words sink in as he scanned the faces before him, each one reflecting the pain and hope that had brought them there. The crowd erupted in murmurs of agreement, and Margaret stepped beside him, her spirit ignited by the energy of the moment. "Each of you has a story, a reason for wanting to fight back," she said, her voice strong and unwavering. "We must share these stories with each other. Together, we can forge a path toward freedom." As she spoke, she saw the flicker of determination ignite in the eyes of those around her, a shared understanding that they were no longer alone in their struggles. As they spoke, the air thickened with purpose, and the spark of rebellion ignited. The crowd listened intently, their hearts swelling with a mix of fear and hope. Samuel and Margaret's words resonated deeply, stirring the embers of resistance that lay dormant within each listener. In that moment, they transformed from mere workers into a united front, ready to challenge the oppressive forces that had sought to keep them divided. But, unknown to them, the overseers were also watching, their suspicions confirmed. As the night unfolded, a storm was brewing not just in the skies but within the hearts of those who had long suffered in silence. The overseers, fearing an uprising, began to mobilize their forces, preparing to crush any sign of rebellion before it could take root. The tension in the air grew thick, a tangled web of hope and fear, as the very ground beneath them seemed to tremble in anticipation of the confrontation that lay ahead. As the gathering reached its peak, Samuel felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Let us be the change we wish to see," he shouted, his voice rising above the murmur of the crowd. "Let us rise up and claim what is rightfully ours. Together, we can break the chains that bind us." The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices rising in a chorus of defiance that echoed through the night, a sound that resonated with the pain and hope of generations. But in the shadows, the overseers were gathering their forces, their eyes filled with malice and determination. They would not allow this rebellion to take shape without a fight. As the moon bathed the gathering in its silvery light, the stage was set for a confrontation that would test the courage and resolve of every individual present. The spark had been lit. Now it was a matter of whether it would ignite a revolution or be extinguished in the darkness. The night air was thick with tension as the gathering reached a fever pitch. Samuel stood at the forefront, his heart racing, every beat echoing the urgency of their situation. Around him, the faces of his fellow workers shone with determination and fear, a potent mix that mirrored his own emotions. They had come together under the cover of darkness, united by a shared longing for freedom, and now they stood on the brink of something monumental. As the fervor of their voices swelled, Margaret felt a surge of adrenaline. She looked around at the faces illuminated by the flickering firelight, each person representing a story of struggle and resilience. "We are here tonight because we refuse to be silent any longer," she shouted, her voice ringing clear and strong. "We have endured enough pain and suffering. It is time for us to rise, to reclaim our dignity, and to fight for our freedom." The crowd erupted into cheers, the sound reverberating through the night like a battle cry, echoing off the trees as if nature itself was bearing witness to their resolve. But even in this moment of unity and strength, shadows loomed just beyond the circle of light. Unbeknownst to the gathered crowd, the overseers had dispatched a small group of men to investigate the source of the noise, their hearts filled with malice and the intent to crush any hint of rebellion. They crept through the darkness, their footsteps silent, but their intent clear. The overseers were determined to maintain their grip on power, and they would not hesitate to use violence to quell the uprising. As Samuel continued to rally the crowd, he felt a sudden chill in the air, an instinctual warning that something was amiss. He glanced towards the tree line, sensing movement just beyond the reach of the firelight. "Stay focused," he called out, trying to keep the energy high. "This is our moment. Let's not waste it." His words were buoyed by the energy of the crowd, but the unease gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. Margaret, sensing Samuel's distraction, leaned closer to him, her voice low. "What is it, Samuel? Do you see something?" He nodded slightly, his eyes scanning the edges of the clearing. "I think we need to be careful. I can feel it. We're drawing too much attention." He knew they had to act quickly to harness the energy of the moment before it was too late. Just as he prepared to call for a moment of silence to assess the situation, a rustle in the bushes interrupted the gathering. The overseers had arrived, their figures emerging from the shadows, eyes cold and determined. "What's going on here?" one of them barked, his voice cutting through the night like a knife. The crowd fell silent, fear washing over them as they recognized the threat that loomed before them. Samuel stepped forward, heart pounding. "We're simply sharing our stories," he replied, trying to maintain his composure. "We're tired of living in fear. We're tired of being treated like animals." His voice held a mixture of defiance and desperation, pleading with the overseers to understand the depth of their suffering. But the overseers were not there to listen, their faces twisted with anger and contempt. "You think you can just gather and plot against us? You're nothing but slaves," the overseer spat, stepping forward with menace. "You'll pay for this insolence." The crowd shifted uneasily, the fear palpable in the air. Samuel felt a surge of anger rise within him, the injustice of their situation fueling his resolve. "We are not slaves. We are human beings," he shouted back, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "We deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. We will not stand by and let you oppress us any longer." His words resonated with the crowd, sparking a glimmer of hope even in the face of imminent danger. "Enough of this," the overseer yelled, raising his whip as a threat. In that instant, chaos erupted. The crowd, fueled by a mixture of fear and defiance, surged forward, pushing against the overseers who had come to crush their spirit. Samuel felt the tide of anger sweep through him, the adrenaline coursing through his veins as he joined the movement, pushing back against the oppressors. The confrontation quickly escalated. The overseers, realizing they had underestimated the resolve of the gathered crowd, retaliated with violence, swinging their whips and shouting commands. But the workers, emboldened by the unity they had felt moments earlier, fought back with everything they had. It was a desperate struggle, a chaotic clash of bodies and wills, each side driven by their own convictions. Margaret found herself swept up in the fray, her heart racing as she fought alongside her fellow workers. She had never imagined such a moment would come, yet here she was, battling against the forces that sought to subjugate them. In the midst of the chaos, she caught a glimpse of Samuel, his face fierce with determination as he rallied those around him. Their eyes met, and in that brief moment they shared an unspoken understanding. This was their moment to reclaim their lives. As the struggle continued, Samuel took a deep breath, his mind racing. He knew they could not sustain this fight for long against the overseers' numbers. "We need to regroup," he shouted, trying to reach those around him. "We can't let them divide us." His voice cut through the noise, and slowly the crowd began to rally around him, forming a united front against their oppressors. "Move back towards the trees," Margaret called out, her voice strong and clear. "We can use the cover to our advantage." The crowd began to retreat strategically, moving as one, the firelight fading behind them as they sought the safety of the shadows. The overseers pursued, but the workers fought with a fervor that surprised even themselves. They were driven by a collective desire for freedom, a force that had been stifled for far too long. Once they reached a clearing deeper in the woods, they halted, breathless and wide-eyed, the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. Samuel looked around at the faces of his fellow workers, now lit by the dim glow of the moon filtering through the trees. "We did it," he panted, disbelief mingling with triumph in his voice. "We stood up to them." Margaret, still catching her breath, nodded fiercely. "This is just the beginning. We've shown them that we will not be silenced. We've ignited a spark tonight, and we can't let it die." The group began to murmur among themselves, their fear slowly being replaced by a growing sense of determination. "We need to regroup and strategize," Samuel continued, his mind racing with possibilities. "This can't be a one-time event. We need to spread the word, to gather more people to our cause. We need to show everyone that freedom is within our reach." His words resonated with the group, each person feeling the weight of their shared experience, the fire of rebellion lighting their hearts anew. As they began to formulate their plans for the future, the reality of their situation settled in. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The overseers would retaliate, and the fight would be far from over. But in that moment, surrounded by allies and fueled by their shared desire for freedom, they felt a sense of hope and purpose that had been absent for far too long. "We may be outnumbered, but we are not outmatched," Samuel declared, his voice strong and unwavering. "Together we will rise. Together we will fight for our freedom." The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the trees, a sound of defiance and solidarity that would not easily be forgotten. They were no longer just victims of oppression. They were warriors in the battle for their liberation, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the moon hung high above them, casting its silvery light on their gathering, they knew that this was only the beginning. The spark of rebellion had been ignited, and with it came the promise of change, a flicker of hope that would guide them through the darkness that lay ahead. In the days that followed, the group worked tirelessly to strengthen their resolve and gather more supporters. They utilized the cover of night, moving through the shadows to connect with others who shared their vision. Each encounter was filled with stories of hardship and resilience, and as they shared their experiences, the bonds between them deepened. They became a family forged in adversity, united by a common goal. Samuel and Margaret became the leaders of this burgeoning movement, guiding their fellow workers with compassion and strength. They organized meetings in secret, teaching the importance of strategy and unity. They spoke of their dreams for a future where they could live freely, with dignity and respect. Each meeting was an opportunity to inspire hope, and with each new face that joined their cause, their collective strength grew. But the overseers were not idle. They sensed the unrest simmering beneath the surface and began to tighten their grip, enacting harsher punishments and increasing surveillance. Fear hung in the air like a heavy fog, but Samuel and Margaret remained undeterred. They knew that if they were to succeed, they needed to maintain their resolve and keep the fire of rebellion burning brightly in their hearts. One evening, as they gathered in a secluded area of the forest, Samuel addressed the group with urgency. "We need to be prepared for what's to come. The overseers will retaliate, and we must be ready to defend ourselves. But we must also be strategic. Our goal is not just to fight, but to win the hearts and minds of our fellow workers." He paused, scanning the faces before him. "This is about more than just us. It's about everyone who has suffered under this system." Margaret nodded in agreement, her voice steady and clear. "We must remember that every act of defiance counts. Whether it's refusing to work, sharing our stories, or standing together in solidarity, we are making a statement. We are stronger together than we are apart." Her words resonated deeply, igniting a spark of determination in the hearts of those gathered. As the days turned into weeks, the movement grew. They organized protests, small acts of defiance that sent ripples of resistance throughout the plantation. Workers began to refuse orders, speak out against injustices, and stand together in solidarity. The overseers were caught off guard, their attempts to quell the unrest only serving to fuel the fire of rebellion. But with each act of defiance, the stakes grew higher. The overseers began to crack down harder, their punishments more severe. Samuel and Margaret knew the risks, but they also understood that the struggle for freedom would never come without sacrifice. They were prepared to fight, to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that the hope of a better future was worth every ounce of struggle. As they continued to organize, whispers of their rebellion began to spread beyond the plantation. Allies began to emerge from unexpected places, those who had witnessed their struggle and believed in their cause. Supporters began to offer assistance, providing food, supplies, and resources to bolster their efforts. The movement was gaining momentum, and the message of freedom was resonating far and wide. During one particularly tense night meeting, as the group gathered under the stars, Samuel felt a surge of hope. "We are not alone in this fight," he proclaimed, his voice filled with conviction. "Our stories are being heard, and our struggle is being recognized. Together, we will show the world that we will not be silenced." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices rising in unison, a chorus of determination that echoed through the night. But as they celebrated their progress, a shadow loomed on the horizon. The overseers had become increasingly desperate, their tactics growing more brutal. Rumors began to circulate of impending retaliation, and Samuel felt the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. He knew that the time for action was drawing near. They would need to make their stand before it was too late. In the quiet moments between meetings, Samuel and Margaret often found themselves reflecting on the journey they had taken together. They had faced unimaginable challenges, yet through it all, they had discovered the strength of their resolve and the power of their love for one another. They were not just fighting for their freedom, they were fighting for a future where love and hope could flourish, unbounded by the chains of oppression. As the moon hung high above them, casting its silvery light on the gathered group, Samuel felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. "This is our moment," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "We will rise together, and we will fight for our freedom. We are the architects of our destiny, and together we will shape a future where we can live in dignity and peace." With those words, the air crackled with energy, a shared belief igniting within each person present. They were ready to take the next step in their journey, prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The turning point had come, and with it, the promise of a new dawn, a dawn that would break the chains of oppression and usher in a future of hope, freedom, and possibility. The days that followed the turning point were filled with a charged anticipation, each moment leading the workers closer to the confrontation they knew was inevitable. Samuel and Margaret, now at the helm of the movement, felt the weight of their responsibility heavier than ever. With each passing day, the overseers' oppression grew harsher, their punishments more severe, but the resolve of the workers only strengthened. They were no longer just reacting to the cruelty of their masters. They were preparing to reclaim their lives. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, Samuel gathered the group in a secluded spot near the old oak tree, a place that had become a symbol of their unity and resistance. The air was thick with tension, and the atmosphere crackled with a sense of urgency. "We cannot wait any longer," he began, his voice steady and commanding. "The overseers are preparing to strike back. We need to act before they crush our spirit and our movement. Together, we must make a stand." Margaret stepped forward, her eyes fierce with determination. "We have come too far to turn back now. We need to show them that we are not afraid, that we will not be silenced. This is our chance to fight for our freedom and to inspire others to join us." Her words ignited a fire in the hearts of those gathered, a reminder of the strength that lay within their collective spirit. As they strategized, the group discussed their options, weighing the risks of confrontation against the need for action. Samuel outlined a plan to disrupt the overseer's operations, to strike at a time and place that would send a message of defiance. "We'll gather at the edge of the fields during the evening shift," he said, his voice rising with conviction. "We'll block the paths and prevent them from bringing in supplies. We need to make it clear that we will not accept their tyranny any longer." The group murmured in agreement, their resolve solidifying as they prepared for the upcoming confrontation. They shared stories of their struggles, reminding one another of the pain they had endured and the dreams they held for a better future. With each story, their sense of unity deepened, forging a bond that would carry them through the trials to come. As the sun set that evening, the workers gathered at the edge of the fields, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The atmosphere was electric, a mix of fear and excitement coursing through their veins. Samuel stood at the forefront, his heart racing as he surveyed the faces of his fellow workers. "Tonight, we fight not just for ourselves, but for our families, our children, and for the future we deserve," he shouted, his voice echoing through the twilight. "We are more than laborers. We are human beings with dreams and aspirations." The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices rising like a symphony of defiance. As they formed a line across the path, the tension in the air thickened. Samuel felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he also felt a surge of hope. This was their time to stand together, to fight back against the oppression that had defined their lives for far too long. As the overseers approached, their figures silhouetted against the fading light, the workers stood firm. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest as he prepared to confront the men who had wielded power over them for so long. "Hold the line," he shouted, his voice cutting through the silence as the overseers drew nearer. The workers tightened their grip on makeshift weapons, sticks, stones, anything they could find, ready to defend themselves. The overseers halted, surprised by the sight before them. "What is the meaning of this?" one of them barked, his voice laced with anger. "You've no right to stand in our way." Samuel stepped forward, fearlessly meeting the overseer's gaze. "We have every right," he declared, his voice unwavering. "We are done being treated like animals. We demand to be seen, to be heard, and to be respected." The overseers exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from surprise to contempt. "You think you can just defy us?" Another overseer sneered, stepping forward with a whip in hand. "You will pay for this insolence." The tension in the air reached a breaking point, and Samuel's heart raced as he braced himself for what was to come. Without warning, the overseers charged forward, their whips cracking through the air like thunder. The workers responded, their adrenaline surging as they fought back with every ounce of strength they could muster. It was a chaotic clash. Bodies colliding, shouts of defiance ringing out as the struggle unfolded. Samuel fought alongside his fellow workers, feeling the power of their unity propelling him forward. Margaret was at his side, her spirit unyielding as she swung her makeshift weapon to fend off an overseer who charged at her. "We will not back down," she shouted, her voice fierce as she pushed back against their oppressors. The workers rallied around her, their determination growing with each passing moment. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their dignity, for their future, and for each other. The battle raged on, chaos enveloping the fields as the workers stood their ground. They fought not just with their hands but with their hearts, fueled by the dreams of freedom that had long been suppressed. Each blow, each shout, was a declaration of their existence, a testament to their resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. As the struggle continued, Samuel felt a surge of hope amidst the chaos. He could see the determination on the faces of his fellow workers, and he knew that they were united in their fight for freedom. "Keep pushing forward," he shouted, rallying those around him. "We are stronger together. We will not let them take our dreams from us." His voice cut through the din of battle, reminding them of their purpose. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The workers, fueled by their collective strength, pushed back against the overseers, their resolve unwavering. With each act of defiance, they inspired one another, their courage igniting a fire that could not be extinguished. The overseers, once confident in their power, began to falter, fear creeping into their hearts as they realized they were outmatched by the sheer force of unity. In the midst of the struggle, Samuel caught a glimpse of Margaret, her face fierce and determined as she fought valiantly. The sight of her ignited a flame within him, a reminder of why they were fighting. He pushed forward, determined to reach her side. "Together!" he shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. "We can do this together!" As the battle raged on, the workers began to push the overseers back, reclaiming their power with each step. The sound of their chants filled the air, a chorus of defiance that echoed through the fields. "Freedom!" they cried, their voices rising in unison, a powerful anthem that resonated with the very essence of their struggle. But as the overseers realized their grip on power was slipping, they resorted to desperate measures. One overseer, fueled by rage, raised his whip high, preparing to strike down those around him. In a split second, Samuel's instincts kicked in. He dashed forward, positioning himself between Margaret and the overseer, ready to protect her at any cost. "No!" he shouted, his voice filled with urgency. He felt a rush of adrenaline as he confronted the overseer, determination etched on his face. "You will not harm her." The overseer hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by Samuel's courage. In that instant, the crowd surged forward, emboldened by Samuel's defiance, pushing back against the overseers with renewed fervor. The battle reached a fever pitch, the sound of cries and shouts blending into a cacophony of resistance. The workers, fueled by a newfound strength, fought not just for their freedom, but for each other, for the bonds they had forged in the crucible of struggle. They were no longer just individuals. They were a collective force, a testament to the power of unity in the face of oppression. As the conflict raged on, Samuel felt a surge of hope. He could see the overseers faltering, their confidence crumbling as they faced the unyielding spirit of the workers. "This is our moment," he shouted, rallying those around him. "We will not back down. We will fight for our freedom." With that declaration, the workers surged forward, their voices rising in a triumphant chorus. The overseers, overwhelmed by the sheer force of their resistance, began to retreat, their power waning as the workers pushed them back. The fields, once a symbol of oppression, became a battleground for freedom, a place where dreams of liberation took root. As the night wore on, the struggle continued, but the tide had shifted in favor of the workers. They had shown their strength, their resilience, and their unwavering spirit in the face of adversity. The overseers, realizing they could no longer maintain control, began to flee, their authority shattered by the defiance of those they had sought to subjugate. In that moment of victory, as the workers stood tall in the moonlight, a sense of hope surged through their hearts. They had fought for their freedom, and together they had reclaimed their power. Samuel and Margaret stood side by side, their hearts filled with pride and determination. They had ignited a revolution, a spark that would continue to burn brightly in the hearts of all who had joined their struggle. "This is just the beginning," Samuel said, his voice filled with conviction. "We have shown them that we will not accept oppression any longer. Together, we will build a future where freedom reigns, where our voices are heard, and where our dreams can flourish." The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices rising in a chorus of triumph. They were no longer just workers, they were warriors in the battle for their liberation, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The night was filled with the promise of a new dawn, a dawn that would break the chains of oppression and usher in a future of hope, freedom, and possibility.